I hope that you're well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on sensory details. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts. And then we're doing grade 7. Once we've logged on to grade 7, then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of sensory details. All right, so our chapter is sensory details. Our subject is English Language Arts. Grade 7. And then the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of sensory details is to identify sensory details. We're going to identify sensory details. All right. So when it comes to sensory details, right, and then it makes us think of our senses, right? And remember, our senses are words like see, which is sight, sound, things that we can hear, smell, right? What we can smell, taste, the things that we eat and we taste, we make sense thereof, as well as touch. Those are our senses, right? And when it comes to our sensory details, then writers they use sensory details to make a story or to make stories or scenes easier for the reader to imagine. Because remember, if you are reading something, and then writers need to be more descriptive when it comes to, in order to make stories more interesting. Because remember, we as readers, we are drawn by how descriptive something is, especially since you are not seeing something. So now the fact that you are reading something, you need to make sense of what you're reading. You need to try and imagine being in the book, or you need to try and imagine, let's say, seeing or feeling whatever that the writer is trying to portray without looking at pictures. All right. So we see that writers they use sensory details to make stories and scenes easier for the reader to imagine. Because remember, we as readers, we try to imagine whatever the reader is trying to portray, whatever the reader is trying to say, right? So we need to imagine that. And sensory details, it makes the reader imagine a particular sight. It makes the reader to imagine a particular sound, a particular smell, taste, or touch. And that is basically where our sensory details comes in. Because remember, the writer needs to describe something in a particular manner in which we try and make sense of how the person looks. That is when it comes to a particular sight. We need to try and imagine that, this person looks like this. So they'll maybe say that he or she was tall, they were slim, they were fair, they were pale, they were dark skinned, right? So now we try to imagine, based on what the writer is trying to say, that okay, this is a particular site that he or she is trying to make mention of. The sounds, the screeching sounds, the banging sounds, these are all sounds that the writer would basically try to write in the story or in a text or in a book in order for us to make sense of the sound. All right. The writer also needs to basically, we need to try and imagine what the writer is trying to say when it comes to smell or taste or touch. And if we look at examples, right, of how the writer would basically try and make us as the reader imagine a particular sight or a particular sound or particular smell, taste, or touch. Let's say, for example, if we look at this one, sight, right? Sight is what we see. That is one of our senses. It is sight, it's what we see. And if the writer tries to make us imagine a particular sight, then the writer would, for example, say, John's face glowed from the light of the fire. So John's face glowed from the light of the fire. And then if he's trying to, or she's trying to make the reader imagine a particular sound, then it will say something like, in the morning, Samantha awoke to a chirping of birds outside her window. So now this is now you trying to imagine that you are waking up in a peaceful environment. All you hear is chirping of birds instead of the screeching sound of cars, or the sound of people, or the sound of, let's say, trains or something, but you woke up to birds chirping. That is peace. So these are words that the writer would use in order for us to try and imagine the sight, the sound, the smell, the taste, the touch. All right. And then when the writer is trying to make the reader imagine a particular smell, then we can say an example is, I caught a whiff of freshly baked bread as I passed by the bakery. So I got a whiff of freshly baked bread as I passed by the bakery. That is us trying to make sense of the smell. What are you smelling? Freshly baked bread from a bakery that smells so delicious. It hits straight to your stomach, straight to the throat, straight to the stomach. And are you even feeling hungry, for example. So it can either be a good smell um depending on the type of, or let's say something that you're reading, or it can be a not so pleasant smell. If, for example, depending on whatever that the writer is writing, if they trying to make maybe mention of a smell that is not so pleasant, then they will also, for example, be descriptive in that sense. All right. And then if the reader is trying to make us imagine a particular taste, if the reader is trying to make us imagine a particular taste, then the example would be the sharply sour apple made Mary's mouth pucker. It's telling us how this specific taste also made somebody feel. The sweetness of the tea, the sweetness of honey, or something like that. And then touch. It says Ted was uncomfortable in his scratchy wool sweater, meaning you can already imagine that Ted had on this woolly sweater and he was uncomfortably and constantly scratching and constantly, it was almost like he was being irritable. And once again, if we look at the examples of sight and sound and smell and taste and touch, these are examples of how a reader is trying to make us as the writer is trying to make us as the readers imagine what he or she is trying to write. And when it comes to sensory details, I, for one, am somebody that I want to at least kind of feel as if I am in the book. I see what the writer is trying to see. I'm trying to hear what the writer is trying to hear, or the sound that he or she is trying to portray. The smell, the taste, the touch. Sometimes the smell can be described as in the perfume that somebody wears, the sweet smell of and sensory details, right? It makes a story, what makes scenes easier for us to imagine, for us as readers to imagine. And how better for us to imagine, you know, a particular scene or a particular story than using all of our senses. Being able to, you don't see a character in a story, but based on the descriptiveness of how the person looks, you are now trying to basically sculpt a picture in your mind of how the character looks. All right. So now we're going to go to aplusstudents.ca, and we are going to continue with our sensory details. And we said writers, they use sensory details to make stories and scenes easier for the reader to imagine. And the sensory details makes the readers imagine a particular sight, a particular sound, a particular smell, a particular taste, or even a particular touch. All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca, and we are going to identify sensory details. All right, so we're not going to go over that again. Let us look at, we're going to select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes smell. So we're going to look at the sentence and we're going to try and identify or select the sentence with the sensory details that describes a smell. It says, Devon held her nose and tried not to breathe in the nasty fumes of fresh sewage rising from the broken sewer main in the street outside her house. This was really dreadful luck. Her study partner Marlon was on his way over right now, and they were supposed to be getting ready for tomorrow's big French test. He hadn't been to our house before, and now Devon was afraid that he would not be impressed. We need to select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes smell. And if we were to select the sentence with the sensory details that describe smell, then it says Devon held her nose and tried not to breathe in the nasty fumes of fresh sewage rising from the broken sewer main in the street outside her house. So basically, she is smelling the nasty fumes of the fresh sewage. And sewage smell is an unpleasant smell. All right. So nasty fumes of fresh sewage. And where is it coming from? It's coming from the broken sewer main, right in the street outside of the house. But nasty fumes of fresh sewage. Yes, so the detail is nasty fumes of fresh sewage. That is the details that describes a smell. We now need to select the sentence with the sensory details that describes taste. That describes taste. It says, as Roscoe headed home, he was looking forward to picking some strawberries. Roscoe and his mom had grown their own berries this year. He could not wait to bite into those perfectly ripe, sweet berries. All day long, he'd been thinking about picking a big basket full of them. He figured there was a good chance his little sister would have left plenty for him to pick. And if we were to select the sentence or a sensory detail that describes taste, and if we were to describe the taste, we would say it is a perfectly ripe, sweet, perfectly ripe, sweet berries. Sweet, it is ripe, and that can describe a smell, a taste. So perfectly ripe, sweet berries. That describes a taste. All right, so we now need to select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes sound. Sound. It says, I love visiting my grandma's house except for one thing. We need to select the sentence with the sensory detail that describes sound. And it says, I love visiting my grandma's house except for one thing. She lives right under the flight path of the international airport. The large planes flying overhead shriek and rumble. So we can say the large, or the one, the sentence, so we can say the large planes flying overhead shriek and rumble, making so much noise that I can't think straight until they've gone. The funny thing is that even though I find it irritating, Grandma and my little sister Martha always gets excited when the planes passes over us. And if we were to select the sentence with the sensory details that describe sound, then they would describe it as the large airplanes flying overhead shriek and rumble. So shriek and rumble, that describes a sound. Yes, so shriek and rumble because they're making some noise and you cannot think straight. Right. So that is the sound. We had to select the details of smell and of taste and of sound. All right, so now we're going to taste. And we need to select the sentence with the sensory detail that describes taste. All right, so we said that we need to select the sentence with the sensory detail that describes taste. It says Jane's soccer game was cancelled because of the forest fire. So Jane's soccer game was cancelled because of the forest fire. She hadn't understood the logic of that since the fire was miles away. But that afternoon, when she went outside, she got a big mouthful of that sooty, smoky ash flavor from the fire. Mom was right. Today was a good day to stay inside. Jane hoped the firefighters got the fire under control soon. So we need to select the sentence or select the sentence with the sensory details of taste. So do we say it's option one? Mom was right, today was a good day to stay inside. Or B, option two, sorry. But that afternoon when she went outside, she got a big mouthful of soothing, smoky ash flavor from the fire. Which one is correct? And if we were to choose the correct option, we'll choose option two. All right. All right. So now we're going to select the sentence with the sensory detail that describes smell. Smell. Scent. Smell. It says Irene held her nose and tried not to breathe in the nasty fumes of fresh sewage rising from the broken sewer main in the street outside our house. This was really dreadful luck. Dreadful luck. Her study partner Clayton was on his way right now, and they were supposed to be getting ready for tomorrow's French test. He hadn't been to a house before, and now Irene was afraid that he would not be impressed. We need to select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes the smell. All right. So is it option one, where we say Irene held her nose and tried not to breathe in the nasty fumes of fresh sewage rising from the broken sewer main in the street outside her house? Or is it option two, he hadn't been to a house before and now Irene was afraid that he would not be impressed? All right, and if we were to choose the correct option, either option one or option two, we said option one, we already read that, and then option two, he hadn't been to the house before, and now Irene was afraid that he wouldn't be impressed. Which option gives us the idea that the sensory details describe smell? Which option? All right. So we said if we want to make sense of the smell, then we can say Irene held her nose and tried not to breathe in the nasty fumes of fresh sewage rising from the broken sewer main in the streets outside our house. All right. All right. And if we were to choose this, the sin, oh, we already did. The next one says we need to select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes sight, things that we can see. It says every Saturday Marshall searches the beach near his house for interesting objects. Starting after breakfast, he walks back and forth on the sand. He usually finds shells and stones, but sometimes he comes across unusual things. He particularly prizes sea glass because he loves its frosted green appearance. He puts what he finds in a shoebox and he keeps on a shelf in his bedroom. And we don't need to try and find or select the sensory details that describe sight, things that we can see. Is it option one? He puts what he finds in a shoebox that he keeps on a shelf in his bedroom. All right. So if we want to describe sight, things that we see, and then we will choose option two. He particularly prizes sea glass because he loves its frosted green appearance. So, frosted green appearance, that is how he describes it. Now we need to select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes a sound, something that you can hear, a sound. All right. And if we were to, all right, if we were to choose the sentence that describes sound, then it says option one, I love visiting my grandma's house except for one thing. Or option two, the large planes flying overhead shriek and rumble, making so much noise that I can't think straight until they're gone. All right, so that is basically how we identify sensory details. Because the reader will then, for example, describe something to an extent that we get the idea of this is what I see, this is what I hear, this is what I touch, this is what I taste, and so on. All right, so this is the end of our lesson on sensory details. All right, thank you very much, everybody, for logging in. Thank you for joining the class, and I really hope you're going to have a good evening further. Till next time, goodbye.